Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Dumas Haddad's short film, Flowers. Now, this is about 8 minutes or so, I think, in runtime, and it is a fantasy story that is, I would say, it runs on an economy of visual poetry. And what I mean by that is there's very little dialogue. There's very little concrete information that we're given about what exactly is going on. Most of what we have is the story being developed almost by implication. So the basic storyline, as I understand it, is a prince is sort of, what's the right way of putting this? His mother basically sort of sends him out into the world to find his fortune. He is on some level a sort of unexpected prince. And what I mean by that is he apparently has 4 older brothers, each of whom has, for one reason or another, through their character flaws, lost the opportunity to gain the throne. And so I guess in a way, this is, we might see this as a sort of trial by fire, almost, right? Like this prince being sent out into the world to test his mettle, as it were, and determine whether or not he is going to be qualified, good enough, upright, whatever it is, to sit on the throne someday. And he sort of goes out, and the implication is that he encounters this somewhat sinister figure. She seems to be a witch, perhaps, and part of the reason, or an embodiment of temptation, maybe. And part of the reason that I say that is we don't get a real clear look at her, but we do see her hand, because she's in sort of white robes and has a veil and things like this. Not like a bride, more sort of ghostly, but, whatever. But we see her hand. I think it's her left hand, technically. It doesn't really matter. And it seems to be maybe feathered or furred or something. She clearly not a human hand, even if it's a humanoid hand. And it holds an apple, which she lets fall to the ground, and it lands atop a pile of other apples. The apple, of course, associated biblically with the story of Genesis, even though Genesis itself does not ever say it was an apple. That's what a lot of people believe the fruit of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was. Like, it gets represented as an apple consistently. So there's that association. We can also think of Snow White, where the Wicked Queen poisons an apple in order to try and destroy the virtuous young royal person. And so again, there's these sort of symbols of evil, these symbols of threat and peril. But the prince subsequently encounters someone that we take to be a princess. I think we're supposed to take to be a princess, with whom he sort of reconnect. And her sort of voiceover spoken dialogue is in parallel to the dialogue that was spoken by the prince's mother when she sent him out into the world on this quest. And so the film, in that sense, sort of comes full circle, right? Where it begins with his departure from safety, from security, from home, into the world of this trial, and then it ends with a return to a new safety, security, home, presumably at the end of the trial. And the fact that the prince is rewarded with this relationship with the princess suggests that he has successfully passed through the trial, right? This is a very standard epic narrative structure, right? It's a very common, basic plot line in the sort of broad brushstroke sense for adventure stories, quest stories, etc., etc. And that is essentially what Flowers is. It is a quest narrative in which we see very little of the actual action of the questing. What we tend to have is a lot of lingering camera shots on evocative scenes, whether that is the prince leaning on his bicycle holding a bundle of flowers, hence the title, whether that is the mother's hand on the prince's cheek at the beginning of the film, whether that is the princess's hand on the prince's cheek at the end of the film, whether that is the witch or temptation or whatever it is, whom we see sort of stood in the middle of the woods in front of her pile of apples, whatever it is. Rather than this being a sort of action-driven short film in which stuff happens, it is an emotive short film in which we experience images that are meant to evoke particular feelings, and through those feelings we get the overarching movement of this story. This is also an interesting short film because all of the characters are black. And that's not in itself all that interesting, right? There's a lot of short films, there's a lot of films in which all of the characters are black. Great, good stuff. In the context of a fairy tale, right, where we have a prince going on a quest, finding a princess, etc., etc., we often, in the West, think we will envision those characters as white. Disney, of course, has not traditionally helped that, right? I mean, you think about Snow White, a character whom I mentioned before. Are there any characters of color in Snow White? Probably not. Not as far as I remember. I haven't seen the movie in a long, long time. But like these classic Disney movies that for so many of us and for the sort of larger culture of Western civilization has really shaped the way we think about fairy tales and the way we envision fairy tales. The overarching whiteness of these characters generally sort of undercuts that willingness to see non-white characters within fairy tale spaces. So this is a sort of Afro-futuristic fairy tale. It's striking. I actually don't know where Haddad is from. I did sort of look into him slightly, and the interesting thing is that almost everything I came across online about him, about his sort of biography, says raised in London. Haddad is himself, I think, a person of color, but Yeah, I think it does sort of matter to have representation of people of color within fairy tale type stories, because again, as with all types of representation, it broadens out who can start to see themselves in particular roles. What type of person or people can envision themselves as a noble, gallant prince, or as a princess, etc., etc. And so, in that sense, there's sort of good cultural work to be done in terms of broadening that representation, and Haddad's film is participating in that.